All right, welcome everybody. For those who are returners, welcome back. For folks who are joining us for the first time, welcome. I'm Dr. Samuel Montano, the coordinator for psychological services here at Fresno City College and the other colleges that are a part of our district. I'd like to just very quickly introduce my team who is going to be leading this presentation. Today with us, we have Jamaria Lewis, we have Michael Rita and Natalia Velasquez. They are all in doctorate programs, getting their doctorates in clinical psychology, and they are interning with us this year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my team, and you're in store for a great presentation on primary prevention, Zoom fatigue, and stigma reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Montano. Next slide, please. So I will start us out on going over what mental health stigma is. And this is very important for us to know. So what is mental health stigma? It's a negative evaluation of those with mental illness or of mental health treatment. Oftentimes, individuals who are diagnosed with a mental illness, they no longer feel like they're seen as an individual, but they are stereotyped in a particular group. And stigma can often equal stereotyping, which goes into prejudice, which goes into discrimination. And some researchers, they say that stigma is associated with mental illness, and it can be broken down into two types. It can be broken down into public stigma and self-stigma. Next slide, please. So public stigma, often we can refer to it as social stigma, is the negative or discriminatory attitudes that others have about mental health. And the attitudes that others have on mental health, it supports the stereotypes about people. And some common examples of the public stigma can be found in the news, or it can even be found on social media platforms. I was reading a magazine article, and some individuals gave real life examples about their mental illness and the stigma placed on them. And one of the examples were, one time I went into a panic attack in front of someone, and they told me I'm crazy and I should be locked up. That is a stereotype that others have on people with a mental illness, that they're crazy, they should be locked up, or they're dangerous. Next slide, please. So the next type is self-stigma. So this is negative attitudes that someone places on themselves, which include internalized shame. It can affect how someone thinks about themselves and their relationships with others. The same magazine article that I read, an individual shared an experience that they had. They went out to eat with friends, and one of the friends told them that it's hard to be around them because they're so depressing. So that individual internalized that, and they felt that, I'm not worth being around. I'm just not worth it. And that happened to them when they were in the 8th grade, and they still hold on to that as an adult. Next slide, please. So as we look at, what is the mental health stigma? What is the public stigma, the self-stigma? It can create harmful effects on mental health. Individuals can experience hopelessness. They can experience lower self-esteem, experience difficulties with social relationships. They have the reduced likelihood of staying in treatment. They have more difficulty in the classroom, at work, or any other settings in their life. They can experience shame, experience being stereotyped, and experience derogatory labels placed on them. And they can have a sense of blame that they have a mental illness. They experience social isolation and loneliness. There's a lack of understanding by their friends, families, teachers, or others that are in the individual's life who have a mental illness. They may experience fewer opportunities for work, school, or other social activities. They may also experience bullying, the physical violence, or harassment that they do have this mental illness. As they experience these things, it can cause them significant amount of distress. They may live in secrecy because they don't want others to know they have a mental illness, which they'll be placed a stigma on them. And they're being treated differently than others in their society. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as we look at mental health stigma, there's other groups that are subjected to mental health stigma. People with intellectual disability or individuals from a cultural or ethnic minority group. I give a few examples here because it's very important for us to know that what does it look like in different cultures? So within the Asian culture, they believe that seeking professional help for a mental illness may be counter to their cultural values of strong family belief. They may have emotional restraint and avoiding that shame. The African American culture, they experience distress of mental health care system and fear that others would react to them seeking treatment. And then the Latino culture, them seeking treatment involves the shame. And if they seek treatment and they're diagnosed with antidepressants, that's being related to the idea of they're crazy or they're associated with illegal drugs. So as we look at, what are the statistics in mental health? And especially when we're working with student population. So the mental health issues are prevalent among young adults. And sometimes the young adults are referred to as the anxious generation. So 39% of students in college experience significant mental illness. And this is very important as we look at what just happened with the pandemic, COVID-19 and having classes online. We'll talk more about that later. One half of mental health issues began by the age of 14 years old. So some students have just graduated high school, they are coming into college, and some may already be coming in with a mental illness, but then 75% begin by age 24 years old. So they may have come in with a mental illness or have a mental illness later on. 67% of people 18 to 24 years old with anxiety or depression do not seek treatment. Now, that's a very high percentage when we look at how are we going to help the students. Next slide, please. So as we have an idea of what is mental health stigma, what are the negative effects of mental health stigma? What are the types of stigma? How can we reduce it? How can we reduce it amongst our students? How can we reduce it amongst the staff and faculty? First, we can start by educating ourselves and educating others. You can be more conscious of the language that you use, or be more conscious of the language that others use around you. Encourage equality among the students. Show compassion. If you're a teacher, tailor your assignments and your syllabi. Don't label or judge somebody who has a mental illness. Talk openly of your own experiences of mental illness if you feel comfortable, because sometimes if you're diagnosed with a mental illness, you may feel like you don't want to have a label placed on you, the stigma behind it. But if you feel comfortable, talk openly with a student that comes into your office. If you see out in the hallway, mention your commitment of mental illness to reduce that stigma. Be welcoming of students that have a mental illness. Share the facts about mental health and the illnesses. Speak up to your friends, your family, and your colleagues about mental illness. This is very important. Get everybody on the same page to educate one another. Empower the students and provide stress management resources, and then take the preventative measures. We'll learn more about that later when Natalia presents on that. Launch wellness campaigns around the campus. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Michael.
All right, thank you, Jamaria. Um, well, here when we were putting this presentation together and thinking about, okay, so how do we put this into practice? How do we begin that process of destigmatizing mental health at Fresno City College and throughout the district? Well, we thought, well, what better way than to discuss a mental health phenomenon that has affected all of us in one way or another, inconsistently, throughout the last year and a half, but still across the board since the beginning of this pandemic. I'm, of course, as you can see on the slide, talking about Zoom fatigue. We have all felt it at one point or another through different circumstances, at different times of the year, and in different intensities. But it is very much a mental health phenomenon that all of us were subjected to in March of last year, as just the COVID-19 caused this upheaval of our work environments, our personal and social environments, and Zoom, while it was very adaptive, while it was something that allowed us to keep going with our normal business, right? It was something that we were able to latch onto in order to salvage some form of normalcy and productivity. It came with its cost. Every choice involves some sort of loss here. And so we've become familiar with this term, Zoom fatigue, that refers to the tiredness, the worry, or burnout associated with overusing virtual platforms of communication. And it emerged pretty much at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic due to the widespread use and the necessity of Zoom. Of course, a lot of us were working remotely occasionally before the pandemic, and it wasn't limited to Zoom specifically, that particular type of software. But whether it was Skype, whether it was FaceTime, whatever it was, all of those things got dialed up to an 11 once COVID put us inside and away from each other in person. And so there was a adjustment that took place that shifted the way that we think, shifted the way that we think about our work. I want to just take a second here to sit with that word burnout in that definition I have there in that first bullet point. For those of you that participated in our first presentation all the way back in August, you may remember or vaguely recall this differentiation we talked about between vicarious traumatization and burnout. And just to summarize, vicarious trauma is something that's very individually focused. Vicarious traumatization and the associated feelings from that, those aren't necessarily going to go away when one leaves the job or it takes a few days, vacation days in order to refresh themselves, or they take an early retirement even. Vicarious trauma was there to stay. Burnout, while it might experientially feel the same, it can very much be addressed systemically. That burnout is something that we can adjust our work cultures. We can adjust the demands and requirements of our job and our work environments in order to account for the mental health of employees, of administrators, of students. We can normalize mental health, the mental health fallout of stressors such as the COVID-19 pandemic, such as teaching in general being a very stressful position. Some of our positions here at the college being more stressful than others. Being able to name that and recognize it, we can accommodate for burnout so as to destigmatize the mental health toll that it takes and to stop the cycle of burnout leading to further burnout. In addition to the increased use of virtual platforms of communication, COVID-19 pandemic also forced many professionals to abruptly repurpose their living space, our homes, our sanctuaries for some of us, repurposing those spaces into offices, into workspacing, finding creative ways to adapt their work methods to accommodate the quarantine procedures and the CDC guidelines, the guidelines within the state of California. And it also introduced this technological variability into even the simplest of tasks. Before the pandemic, before working from home, your router can decide to turn itself off and it's not going to throw off your entire workday. Something like that now could take away hours of productivity and derail almost our entire week if you have internet problems at home. And these are problems that we were not used to feeling the effects of so intensely before the pandemic. Adding to Zoom fatigue is the compulsory nature of this pandemic. We are using Zoom not because we want to necessarily, but because we have to. There are some of us who do prefer using Zoom than in person. And so that is to be recognized. But the fact of the matter is that whether you like it or not, it is here for the foreseeable future. And we're still unsure of how long we're going to be having to do this. How long are we going to have to remain flexible in our work environments as CDC guidelines change? And so that being said, I want to take a minute and normalize here that for some, Zoom fatigue could very well become an adjustable, a diagnosable adjustment disorder response. And so you'll see here that I have on the slide the criteria that for an adjustment disorder. And keeping in mind, I cannot understate this enough, just how big of an adjustment working remotely has become for many of us. Whether it was positive or negative or something in between, it was still a big shift in our normal lives and has lingering effects that ripple across all facets of our mental health. And so we see the development of emotional or behavioral symptoms. We start feeling the effects of the shift identifiably and in response to an identifiable stressor occurring within 3 months of the onset of said stressor. Some of the suggestions that I have for combating Zoom fatigue in the next couple of slides, they come from a review in the Harvard Business Journal that was released in April of 2020. That's how early we were using phrases like Zoom fatigue and adjusting the mental health fallout and changes in our productivity due to the working from home requirements. Some of these symptoms or behaviors are clinically significant, as evidenced by one or more of the following: a marked distress that is out of proportion to the severity or intensity of the stressor, taking into account external context and cultural factors that might influence the severity and presentation of something like Zoom fatigue. That even if, like I mentioned before, there are people that were working remotely before the pandemic, if your experience, think back to April or May of 2020, and your experience was, wow, I'm still doing a lot of the same tasks and in the same way that I was doing before the pandemic, but it still feels off. It still takes longer to do these tasks. It still feels more draining to address these things, even if what I'm actually doing isn't all that different from how I was working before. That might be a sign of a disordered adjustment. Significant impairment in social, occupational, or otherwise important areas of functioning. If your Zoom fatigue is draining at work and you start to feel other activities outside of work are equally draining, or it's harder to recover from Zoom fatigue even after you've clocked out for the day, we might be in the area of a diagnosable adjusted disorder response. The stress-related disturbance does not meet the criteria for another mental disorder and is not an exacerbation of something pre-existing. It doesn't represent normal bereavement, which that's where it becomes complicated. A lot of us know people who have lost their lives in this pandemic as we're dealing with all the shifts in our work environment. Some of us have even lost coworkers to this. And once the stressor or its consequences have terminated, the symptoms do not persist for more than an additional 6 months. And that is something that, as we hope to bring more students back onto campus in the next semester, as we try to employ more of these hybrid models going forward in the school year, a lot of our work environments are going to change again. Some of them might be more of a return to normal. But even in those cases, even if what we're returning to resembles the old normal, if some of these, the draining feelings and the fatiguing feelings of Zoom still linger even after we've gone back into in-person, then there might be something more to it than just fatigue. There might be just the rapid adjustments throughout the last year and a half, maybe taking its toll in other ways of your mental health that might need a more direct, maybe need to address more directly. And so what do we do then with something like Zoom fatigue? How do we combat it directly? Well, according to the psychological literature, which there isn't that much of at this point, due to Zoom fatigue only really being so widespread within the last year and a half. A year and a half is a long time, and unfortunately is not a long time in the realm of academic research. A year and a half, academic research is a very slow moving machine. So there's only been preliminary studies done into Zoom fatigue. But what we have found, what researchers have found, is that it comes back to self-presentation pressure. That there is so much of Zoom fatigue that is tied into the fact that we are always aware on one level or another of being watched. That is a significant factor into Zoom fatigue, that being watched enhances the need to manage impressions of ourselves, our bosses, our coworkers, our students, and it directs all this energy inward, and thus taking its toll inward. It induces fatigue. The constant gaze of the camera during a virtual meeting that broadcasts us directly to our coworkers' screens nonstop, as well as the constant self-gaze of seeing ourselves in a small window in our own peripheral vision, like I am right now. These accentuate the feeling of fatigue as we become hyper aware of ourselves. Take a minute and think about an in-person meeting between you and your coworkers. Maybe you're in a conference room. That conference room is going to have at least one window, or it'll be the table of the conference room might be directed towards a projector, or where a projector is going to be aiming a presentation at. It might be a big enough room where, depending on where you're seated, you may not see all of your coworkers all at one time. It might have a seating arrangement where your attention is focused somewhere else or to the primary presenter, right? You're not making direct eye contact with all of your coworkers all at the same time, never breaking that contact throughout the entirety of a presentation. That just isn't something that is possible in person. Our necks would hurt if we did all that, right, for an entire meeting. And yet here we are over Zoom, where that's exactly what takes place. That we're constantly looking at each other. We might as well be making direct eye contact with each other all the time. That's a lot of stimuli for us to make sense of. It's a lot of information to take in. It takes its toll. And so being hyper aware of that is something that contributes to Zoom fatigue identifiably. And this effect, this constant gaze, takes its toll, especially on what the research has identified specific groups that it takes a toll on. Newer participants, newer first-year students, new employees, newly promoted employees as well. They may feel the need to present themselves more effectively in order to make a good first impression, in order to find their niche within the work culture, the work environment. If you're trying to do that over Zoom, you're trying to overcome this digital barrier into building relationship with your colleagues or with fellow students, that's going to increase all of the fatigue you otherwise would have felt via Zoom fatigue. Groups that have historically been disadvantaged in the workspace, such as women, people of color, groups that are combating workplace stereotypes that go back decades, that predate digital work environments, sometimes by a century or more. That added pressure of virtual meetings may create undue burden by encouraging meeting hosts and participants to keep their cameras on all throughout the meeting. That pressure to overcome certain workplace stereotypes or to set a good impression, that's always going to be on so long as that camera is on. And so one of the ways to manage Zoom fatigue is to find other ways of creating interactive feedback. Because a lot of us in our meetings, one of the main reasons we want these cameras on is to make sure that people are being engaged, right? That people aren't muting themselves, turning their camera off. And even though, yes, they're logged into the meeting, they're doing other stuff. Depending on how good your internet is, you could be streaming Netflix at the same time as you're logged into the meeting. People can be answering emails or dealing with other tasks while they're, logged into the Zoom and supposedly paying attention. And while we might want those cameras on in order, to have some accountability, you can do that through other ways by making meetings more interactive. utilize functions such as the chat window to create dialogue, using poll features within Zoom in order to encourage participants to express their opinion on whatever it is that's being discussed in the meeting. Those are kinds of things that make sure that, okay, yes, they're being held accountable, but they're also being invited to speak, but in a way that doesn't make themselves entirely vulnerable, having that to maintain that self-presentation image all of the time while still being able to engage. Avoiding multitasking. This is a big one because multitasking in and of itself, what the psychology literature has determined that multitasking in and of itself is a myth. The executive function parts of our brains, the higher ordered thoughts, our brain doesn't actually do two things at the same time. It just switches between two tasks very, very quickly at lightning speed. And so while it might be tempting to accomplish several tasks at once, while you have Zoom logged in on one side of your screen and the other half is different internet windows, email chains, an Excel file, a Word file, a PowerPoint, whatever it is that you need to be working on while logged into the Zoom meeting, that could be tempting because everything is just one click away. But attempting to multitask acts as a significant drain on our brain's resources and stamina. And there's research that goes back decades into this, but there's one book in 2009 that was just amazing on demystifying this multitasking, really highlighting this myth that we've created in our culture. In normalization, this is going back to what Jamari presented on before in reducing stigma. By embracing and understanding Zoom fatigue as this mental health phenomenon that all of us are dealing with in one way or another. It affects educators, it affects students, it affects administrators, from the top of the organization in the district all the way to the bottom. Everyone has been affected by Zoom fatigue in one way or another at different times of this pandemic. And so by normalizing that, by putting that forward and making it explicit, hosts and participants of any given Zoom meeting can create work environments that prioritize mental stamina as well as participation. And so reducing screen time is, again, another, this is something I feel like here at Fresno City, I've only been an employee myself for about 2.5 months. I feel like this is something we collectively in the community college culture, we do a pretty good time of incorporating breaks into our Zoom meetings, allowing time for people to step away from their screen for a bit, go take a walk outside, come back. We do a good job of that, but we can, again, reduce even more screen time, right? By being able to talk openly about how zoomed out we are, being able to normalize it. We could take that further and encourage people who are zoomed out to take meeting notes by hand, pen and paper, instead of typing them out, having to multitask, go back and forth between a Word document and the meeting, right? Reducing the time spent in front of screens and reducing on-screen stimuli. And that's another reason to have that camera off. Having all of these different faces looking right back at us, having our own face staring at us while we're presenting at a meeting, that's a lot of on-screen stimuli that is going to increase our fatigue. So however we can reduce screen time, the better. Pre-recorded meetings. This is one that, depending on the task, it might be easier said than done. For administrators and educators that are feeling Zoom fatigue, utilizing services where you can, such as Microsoft Teams, using Canvas to upload pre-recorded meetings or class lectures can greatly reduce fatigue from virtual meetings. Even though it's not happening in real time, it's not live, we don't have that self-presentation pressure on us when something has been pre-recorded and just uploaded to us. For educators, teaching in a hybrid model that incorporates virtual meetings, pre-recorded lectures, and opt-in personal meetings, as that becomes more of an option, as more employees and students are going to become vaccinated, right? All of those things can be combined in a flexible way in order to maintain high quality learning while still reducing the fatigue that we get from the months of digital learning. I'll close with this and then turn it over to Natalia, but pre-recording meetings, just to vouch for it personally, I'm still a student myself, as Dr. Montano had mentioned. I had a professor last year made such an impression on me, earned a lot of respect among students as well as his colleagues by admitting just how zoomed out he was. And within the confines and agreements of the syllabus, was still able to work with students. We all voted on certain lectures within the syllabus that we would prefer to be pre-recorded rather than be live. And he turned the class into sort of a podcast that still we had to listen weekly. And rather than sitting in one Zoom meeting for 3 hours every Monday and Wednesday in order to discuss the lecture and hear him present, we were able to reduce that time in half in front of our Zoom. And instead just listen to the pre-recorded lecture and then come together in order to discuss what we thought about it. And we can have our cameras on, we can have our cameras off, so long as we were unmuted and willing to talk and discuss. It was a great learning environment that was, we were just appreciating the context we were in and the uniqueness of this learning environment. And overall, everybody had the stamina to engage over the course of the semester because those adjustments had been made. And it was destigmatized. It was made explicit. This is what we're dealing with. It's not easy, but we're going to go forward the best we can. With that, I will turn it over to Natalia.
Thank you, Mike. That was such a great example to move into primary prevention, these different kinds of examples that faculty and staff can think about when we want to start thinking about primary prevention and what we can do. I do want to span out because Zoom fatigue is such a big piece of a lot of our lives. And there's also so many other additional stressors that come along with this time during COVID-19. And thinking about students in general, over 75% of students have reported that their mental health has worsened somewhat or significantly worsened since the beginning of the pandemic, with Zoom fatigue, of course, being a big piece of that and the transition to online learning. However, it seems like stress and anxiety, sadness and depression, and loneliness and isolation have been some of the biggest factors of this reduction in mental health. And so there's plenty of other factors as well, from financial setbacks to relocation, illness of self and others during this time, loss and grief during this time, relationship difficulties, and uncertainty of fear for the future too, that goes along with all of this and kind of wraps it in a bow that we don't really know where things are going, but trying to be hopeful of the future. Trouble focusing on studies and work, even having basic needs met, and then limited access to mental health or not knowing where to seek mental health. And so although these are big pieces of college student mental health, I want to take some time for you all to reflect too, that maybe you have experienced some of this as well. And all of us have, kind of experiencing the pandemic similarly, but also differently. And that some of these experiences, as well as others in our personal lives, might be affecting us too. Next slide. And when we think about primary prevention, it can be helpful also to know what has been helpful for students and with their coping strategies to help them cope during COVID and all the stressors that have come along with COVID as well. It shows that virtual interactions with friends, in-person interactions with friends, being around pets, and family support provided by living at home have been significantly helpful for students. And I think that speaks to the socialization piece, whether it is virtually or in person, hopefully safely, of course, that we're able to boost up our socialization, get that interactions with other people, and feeling that connection and relationships with others has been really helpful for students. And I wonder if that's been helpful for all of us in many ways and in different ways as well. Also, virtual mental health services, being able to have sessions like this, being able to talk about mental health, destigmatize mental health, and work on skills and resources for mental health has been shown to be helpful. Involvement in student campus groups, of course, going back to that socialization piece, and then increased privacy and increased financial support from their institutions as well have been really helpful for coping. And about 2/3 of students reported that knowing how to support others in their mental health, knowing where they can seek services for mental health has been really helpful in their process during this time. So also important to know for primary prevention is that most mental health conditions evolve through a series of stages, from wellness to maybe subthreshold symptoms, and then a diagnosable disorder. And prevention efforts can really target any of these stages to kind of avert the progression to the next stage overall. Most conditions are multifaceted and resulted from a combination of different factors. So rather it being from one risk factor operating in isolation, a lot of times looking at the biopsychosocial model, that there's the biological factors, the psychological factors, and the social factors that can influence how we're feeling in our conditions that may develop. And then protective factors can really enhance and protect a person's mental health, or they can even act as this buffer against a person's exposure to risk factors and reduce their chances of becoming unwell. And this is really where we really want to boost and focus on when we think about preventative care and primary prevention, as we want to work on boosting these protective factors, not only for ourselves, but also for our students, and even together, as we'll talk a little bit later about what that might look like in classes or even just in small interactions with students, how we can focus on that prevention for everyone. And there's a very strong, consistent evidence that's shown that personal skill building programs delivered through schools and universities can actually increase these protective factors, such as healthy behaviors and social and emotional skills, self-care skills even, and boosting that resilience to prevent mental health conditions from developing or significantly developing over time and getting worse. And it's good to know that the biggest gains in prevention occur when we focus on factors that are highly prevalent in the community, associated with a condition or strongly associated with that condition, and then readily changed through intervention. So here an example might be that a highly prevalent condition in the community might be like stress or anxiety, and those things can be strongly associated with significant anxiety diagnoses or adjustment diagnoses, as Mike had mentioned before as well, and then readily change through the intervention. So this could be as simple as, different relaxation techniques, self-care, these small interventions that we can provide early on to help start boosting that resiliency before the diagnoses or conditions get worse over time. Thank you, Mike. And so when we think about primary prevention, there's 3 types of preventative measures, but here really focus on this primary prevention, which aims to prevent the onset of a condition by stopping it from occurring in the first place. So before it starts occurring, we want to be providing resources and skills to students and ourselves, even through presentations like this, being able to start that thought processes, planting those seeds of what it looks like to help our mental health so it doesn't get worse moving forward. But there's also secondary and tertiary preventions. So secondary is to detect and treat a condition at its earliest possible stage to reduce its duration and severity over time. And at times we might need this too, when we start noticing that there's a condition that might be coming up, and then how can we reduce its severity over time? And then the last piece, tertiary prevention as well. So reducing the impact of an already established condition on the individual's functioning or their quality of life, and then the longevity of treatment and that condition through this treatment and psychological supports as well. And so when we think about primary prevention, this is just a good visual of kind of what this would look like. So for primary prevention, again, these programs are increasing awareness of and sensitivity to mental health issues. And this could be supporting faculty or staff or students with coping with stress and encouraging them to increase help-seeking behaviors when they are stressed out. So for example, teaching coping skills related to academic stressors for students, like taking breaks or self-care, as Mike mentioned, turning off your camera during Zoom if that's needed for you, for your own self-care and your own breaks that you need, socialization, deep breathing, etc. So being able to provide these skills and discuss them openly, that this is, we're all kind of experiencing a similar thing, even though in different ways, and how can we have those discussions, reduce that stigma, and start being able to share in these resources and these skills together, and especially with our students to help them feel better. And so kind of an example of this might, oh, sorry, Mike, could you go back, please? Thank you. So an example of this might, in a medical way, could be like we take medicines, we take vitamins, we exercise regularly, or we eat healthy and we have a healthy diet. So we're preventing, maybe our health from going south or going in a negative direction that we don't want it to go to. Whereas in secondary prevention, or tertiary prevention, that might be that we have been, diagnosed with elevated blood pressure or mild elevated blood pressure. And at that point, we are now, changing our diet, we're changing our exercise, we're having increased water intake, we're focusing on that stress level. So at that point, we've already started, seeing some symptoms or even eventually being diagnosed. And then we really significantly have to work with someone to be able to boost up our health and be healthy in that way. So the primary piece is that we want to focus beforehand. What are some skills, some resources that we can have before things get more challenging or more difficult, that we're able to help ourselves in our mental health? Next slide. Thanks, Mike. So in primary prevention, there's 3 different types. So there's universal prevention, which may be where most of us are thinking when we think about a classroom or just our interactions, our staff interactions with students. So here we're aiming at the general population without necessarily thinking about a specific risk, but we want to touch like the general population and what can be helpful for them and their development of mental health and taking care of themselves. So an example of universal might be just a program implementing in a full classroom about social or emotional skill development. So having those conversations of what that looks like in these different examples and building it into your syllabus or the way that you're presenting your course materials or even assignments that students do and encouraging them to practice these things. Whereas selective might be aiming at a target individual who have elevated risk. So for example, this could be someone who maybe lost a family member, that could be, faculty, staff, student, and trying to give specific resources to that difficulty as well to help them. And then indicated aims at individuals in which early indicators of a problem might be present, but that criteria for a disorder hasn't been met at this point. So that would be, someone with early depressive symptoms, and again, targeting that specific difficulty to help even reduce some of those symptoms so it doesn't get significantly worse. And it's been shown that universal intervention should reduce the risk of mental health illness and limit the number of individuals who enter more of that higher level of need, although not always, and that's okay. However, programs that are implemented as part of this comprehensive model where we're integrating the community and clinical settings, so talking about mental health and implementing some of these skills in the community have shown that it can lead to better mental health outcomes in the future. Thank you, Mike. And so the promotion of mental health in the community setting, such as colleges, might include activities, routines, goals, and these to foster like the skill development of building positive relationships and healthy functioning. So these are examples of where we could try to implement some of these primary prevention measures. And that might look like early interventions or psychoeducational activities. And here this could be discussing, early on, reducing the stigma, what that looks like, normalizing that we might be experiencing Zoom fatigue or anxiety or stress. And I think Mike's example was perfect for this, is that a professor was able to share their experience because they felt comfortable that we're kind of all experiencing this, even though it's in a different way from between everyone, but also similar in other ways as well, and letting students know that that's okay. And even having that discussion with them, what would be helpful for them to reduce some of the fatigue that they're experiencing. And then some psychoeducational activities as well. So talking about stress reduction activities, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, or even discussing gratitude, compassion, healthy lifestyle behaviors, things that would be helpful for them. So diet, exercise, and sleep, reducing alcohol and substance abuse, encouraging socialization and self-care. These are bits and pieces that doing the research of what these might look like and offering different resources and being able to communicate that with students, whether it's in a class for a short amount of time or even in office hours or in passing with students as well, can really help plant that seed of what it looks like to prevent some mental health difficulties and practice it over time so that it doesn't get worse moving forward. And then finally, health screenings and community outreach. So although maybe staff and faculty might be looking more to early interventions and psychoeducational activities, Psych Services we do health screenings and community outreach as well. So you can even partner with us if you were interested in doing something like this, where we've done health screenings for depression and suicide. We've done outreaches for things that, students have shared that they've had difficulties with, like depression, suicide, anxiety, and plenty of other things as well. So being able to connect with us can be helpful in starting to provide some of these primary prevention measures for your students and also for yourself, learning some new skills and being able to utilize them, whether it's inside of the classroom or outside the classroom as well. And a lot of research has shown that primary prevention in college can be really helpful using teachers and using the classroom as kind of a springboard for what this might look like to help students who might need help with mental health. So utilizing students as an agent of primary prevention. Many important mental health skills can be readily learned, even just Googling, relaxation exercises or self-care or stress and what that looks like, and having these conversations can be taught by educators. And they're not necessarily always complicated or time consuming as sometimes we fear that they might be. So being able to do that quick Google search and practice maybe implementing it into a class syllabus, providing those resources there, or even offering extra credit to practice some of these skills. It could just be a small piece of extra credit of, I'm encouraging you to have a study group, socialize there, or practice the stress reduction activity and do, a brief journaling exercise on it or writing exercise on it. So being able to implement it even in your syllabus and what that looks like. And also in your office hours, that office hours, of course, can be utilized for schoolwork and questions and things like that, but also to process and normalize difficulties that happen that are related to mental health and be able to offer some resources there to your students as well. And also teaching skills rather than just informing about mental health. So, again, we can provide the resources and we can discuss the skills. And that's a really big piece of primary prevention, but also practicing it as well. So whether it's like 5 minutes at the beginning of your class or 5 minutes at the end, or again, encouraging students to practice on your own, even maybe between, a week where there's not an assignment, just encouraging for homework, it is to practice that self-care activity or practice that relaxation activity. So implementing it and encouraging your students to practice these things. And you might find too that the more that you're learning about it and the more that students are learning about it, that we're learning together and we're able to practice together. So we're starting to reduce and prevent our, mental health from deteriorating or going downhill in a way that we don't want it to. So how can we do it early on and practice these skills and have these discussions to normalize mental health and make it part of our daily lives? And then lastly, giving meaningful homework assignments. So again, practicing those mental health skills, encouraging socialization. And there's a lot of benefit to practicing these mental health skills outside of the class too. So if you don't have time in your classes, that makes sense and it's okay. We want to honor you're teaching very important skills to these students and also being able to encourage the mental health skills that could be helpful for them moving forward as well, to reduce that burnout, reduce Zoom fatigue, of course, and other stressors as well that students might be going through. And lastly, I know we have a few moments. I kind of wondering, are there any faculty or staff who've maybe implemented primary prevention measures in their courses or just in interactions with students, or any ideas of what you would like to do? We can kind of collaborate and help each other what that might look like, what you think that might look like. Any ideas? No right or wrong either. Looks like if you'd like to share, you're able to raise your hand and then we can be unmuted if you'd like to speak. Yeah, adding take a break page. That's great. A video clip to breathe. I love that. It's such a great idea to really implement this into your course already. Absolutely. And I think as Mike and Jamar had mentioned too, this really helps to normalize that taking breaks are okay and they're needed and they're really helpful for us, or doing some breathing activities can be really helpful for us. So implementing these small kind of self-care things for our mental health can reduce that Zoom fatigue, reduce the burnout and other stressors as well. Yes, thank you, Dr. Montano. YouTube is so great. And even if you were able to attend our last presentation as well, all of those apps are great to recommend that you could easily put into your syllabus of relaxation applications, self-care applications. Encouraging self-care and giving them a break from a quiz. Yes, that's great. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm glad to hear that some of you have already implemented some of these things, and hopefully this has given you some ideas of maybe what could be helpful, not only for students, but also yourself, and just that collaborative process of what can be helpful to help all of our mental health in general. I know we have some resources as well. Yes, and here's plenty of resources about a lot of different things that we've talked about that can provide different resources for students, also for yourself if you want to learn more and get some more ideas about preventative care, and also just learn about mental health care and other things as well. And Zoom fatigue, of course, see that at the bottom, Mike. That's such a great article to reference.
You're very welcome. I see everyone saying thank you here in the chat here. I want to just say if anyone wants additional trainings or has additional questions after this, you can always email myself or any one of the presenters today, and we'd be happy to respond. Or if you have a classroom you want us to come do a presentation to, we can do that. If you're a manager of a department and you want something tailored specific to your department or team, reach out to us. This is part of what we do at Psych Services as well. We don't just do the clinical services of therapy and group therapy, but we do a lot of outreach and presentations for different folks. So please feel free to reach out. I will put my email in the chat. So thanks again. 9 hours, that's a long one. Any of the panel want to speak to that? Give us some ideas, suggestions for Rebecca.
I can speak, Rebecca, to the camera on the entire time. I would encourage you to find, it's a state requirement, okay? I was gonna encourage you to find places where they can, even just a minute or so, even just 5 minutes here to there, to turn their cameras off. Those little breaks do mean a ton. If the state has tied your hands, then then if the camera has to be on, it has to be on. However, you can encourage them to again avoid multitasking during the meeting. So if they, at the very least, even if they are still dealing with a lot of that self-presentation pressure, at least it's that single focus pressure, that they're not trying to multitask, have to switch back and forth between presenting themselves in a myriad of different environments, that it's just singularly focused on whatever it is that you're presenting on. Okay, so there is that caveat there, where you're able to sort of modulate their ability to turn it on and off. So I would encourage you to work within the state guidelines and see where you can give them these breaks when possible. A little bit will go a long way, especially over 9 hours. I would encourage, anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes per each one of those hours. Let them just decompress. Let them turn that camera off if it's possible. But barring that, minimizing distractions and temptations to multitask, as well as keeping it interactive and engaged through various different ways. They don't necessarily have to be unmuted and talking. They can be engaging through chat. They can be engaging through other ways, so that there isn't that audio self-presentation, right? If the camera has to be on and it's forced, that's okay, but they don't necessarily have to be unmuted that whole time. Take advantage of that. I guess those would be the only encouragements that I have for that training, but wow, yeah, 9 hours, that is a lot. Hopefully they'll be able to, at the very least, incorporate some self-care practices at the end of that 9-hour training.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Michael. I'm sure we've all been in these really long trainings and things like that. And I think some of the ones that are the most beneficial and easier to get through is ones that maybe open up with a practice, right? Maybe opening up with, even if it's a 3-minute deep breathing exercise, or you pull up a YouTube video and say, hey, let's start with this. It's going to be a long day. Let's kind of prep the table. Maybe we'll just put on a visualization video, or maybe at lunch you put one on. We've had presentations during the lunch hour. If you need to be in front of a class or a presenter, maybe some music that's calming. And then, like Mike said, maybe even ending with a practice can be quite helpful.
Also, to add to that too, I've experienced some of these long meetings where even chair yoga, being able to do just different stretches can be helpful. And also environment too, how some students or maybe people in general taking their presentations outside, even in nature, or just in an environment that's comfortable, but the window's open, or there's something that's comfortable around them that for them kind of has that safe kind of quiet area for them to engage in that maybe 9-hour lecture, but being able to have these different self-care, even though it's not an active self-care, but being very mindful and intentional of like the space and the environment that they're in to help with that long, very, very long training that comes up for them.
I'll definitely say it's so great to see that you're thinking about these things, though. That's the beauty of these sort of presentations. I think a couple of the presenters mentioned this. It gets the juices flowing, right? Makes you think, how can I redo a course? How can I redo a presentation? How can I interact with my team a bit differently to help? So I'm so glad you're, putting your comments in the chat and thinking about this, because that's the whole goal. And feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to our psych interns, and thank you to our interpreters, and thank you, Dr. Montano. I want to give a promo. Our next stress reduction session will be facilitated by our Masters of Social Work interns on identifying and setting boundaries. That will be on October 26th, also at 1 o'clock. So be on the lookout in your email for the information to register for that. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.